Imagine for a second that you pick up a biography of a really famous historical figure,
Okay.
someone like Abraham Lincoln, or maybe a massive titan of philosophy, and you open the cover, fully expecting it to start with, well, their birth.
Right, the usual stuff. Their parents, the town they grew up in.
Exactly. Maybe an anecdote about their childhood.
Yeah.
But instead, you turn to the very first page, and the opening sentence basically says, before the universe even existed, this person was there, and they actually created the universe.
Yeah, it completely breaks the contract you thought you had with the author.
It really does.
You realize almost instantly that you aren't reading a standard historical account anymore. You're dealing with a text that claims to transcend time and space entirely.
It's totally disorienting. I mean, the scale, the sheer audacity of a claim like that just shifts the ground right beneath your feet. And, well, that is exactly what it feels like when you encounter the writings we are exploring today.
Actually,
Have you ever wondered how a localized, first century movement fundamentally changed its entire understanding of reality? Like how it moved from just talking about a historical teacher from Nazareth to describing a cosmic pre-existent creator.
it's a massive leap.
It is. So today our deep dive is taking a comprehensive look at the Johannine corpus.
Which, for those who might not know the term, is the collective name for a specific, incredibly dense group of texts traditionally associated with John.
Right?
We're looking at the Gospel of John, the three letters known as 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, and the Book of Revelation.
And the mission today is to dig into the historical, the archaeological, and the literary layers of these texts, right? To really understand how they shaped everything from the concept of truth itself to political resistance against empires.
Yeah, there's a lot of ground to cover.
There really is. We're working off a deep well of historical and theological research today, specifically drawing on a really comprehensive survey by Chris Arvelasis titled John the Apostle and the Johannine Writings.
It's a fantastic source.
It covers everything: the historical background, physical evidence, literary analysis, and some really deep theological themes. So, okay, let's unpack this. Before we get into the ancient papyri or the cosmic throne rooms, let's just establish where this literature actually sits.
Sure.
If you look at the entire New Testament, these writings aren't just like tacked on to the end as an afterthought, are they?
Oh, no, far from it. They definitely don't function as an appendix. In literary and theological terms, this collection is architectonic.
Wait, architectonic, like structural?
Yeah, think of it as the load-bearing wall of an entire cathedral.
Okay.
If you remove it, the overarching narrative structure of the whole thing just collapses. The Johannine literature provides the climax for the entire biblical narrative.
Wow.
It moves humanity through this massive redemptive pattern. I mean, it starts with the eternal word becoming flesh in the gospel, right?
Right.
Then it transitions to the letters, which basically deal with the messy, on-the-ground reality of believers trying to actually live out that truth in real time.
Because theory is easy, but practice is hard.
Exactly. And then finally, it takes us all the way to the absolute consummation of human history in Revelation. So you get this entire trajectory from original creation to a totally renewed creation.
Okay, but to understand what these texts are actually trying to achieve, I feel like we have to pull back the curtain on the world that birthed them in the first place.
We absolutely do.
And there is this massive lingering mystery right at the center of it all, which is who actually held the pen. Because the traditional view for centuries is that this was all written by John the Apostle.
Right, the son of Zebedee.
Yeah, the guy referred to in the gospel as the beloved disciple, who was literally in the room when all this happened.
And that has been the dominant historical position for a very long time. But, well, modern scholarship reveals a much more complicated picture than that.
I love a good historical complication.
Right. Because when you actually sit down and read the Gospel of John, it is internally anonymous. The author never stops the narrative and says, "Hi, I, John, am writing this down."
Which is wild to me. I mean, if you were writing what you believe is the most important document in human history, why wouldn't you sign your name to it? I'd want the credit.
You'd think so. But in the ancient world, authority wasn't always about the individual writer's ego, It was much more about the community's connection to an eyewitness.
Ah, okay.
And the gospel does claim eyewitness grounding. In chapter 21, it explicitly ties the testimony to this beloved disciple.
Right.
But the actual final compilation of the text, the editing and the structuring, that might have been a collaborative effort.
Okay, so then you jump over to the letters, And they aren't signed John the Apostle either, are they?
No, they aren't. Second and third John open with a figure who simply identifies himself as the elder.
Just the elder.
Yeah. And then you get to Revelation, and that author simply calls himself John, a servant who is exiled on the island of Patmos. But he never actually claims to be one of the original 12 apostles.
Okay, so you have a nameless beloved disciple, an elder, and a guy named John stuck on an island. How do historians even begin to untangle that?
Well, it leads to one of the most fascinating scholarly reconstructions out there, which is often called the 2 or 3 Johns theory.
2 or 3 Johns.
Yeah, because when linguists actually study the original Greek across these texts, they notice massive differences.
Like what?
Well, the Greek in the Gospel of John is relatively smooth, it's elevated, it's highly philosophical, but the Greek in Revelation, on the other hand, is rough.
How?
It's erratic, it's heavily influenced by Hebrew grammar, and it just breaks conventional Greek rules all over the place.
So it's like comparing, I don't know, the prose of a philosophy professor to the frantic journal entries of someone who just survived a shipwreck.
That is a highly accurate way to look at it, actually. And because of those stark linguistic differences, critical scholars argue it's just highly improbable that the exact same person physically wrote both of them.
That makes sense.
So the theory suggests a sort of division of labor within a specific community, what scholars often call the Johannine community.
Right.
You might have John the Apostle, who provides the core eyewitness memory. Then you have John the Elder, who shapes those memories into the gospel and writes the letters to manage the community. And finally, John the Seer on Patmos, a prophet within that same circle who writes Revelation.
But I imagine there are scholars who push back on splitting John into 3 different people, right? It sounds like a lot of Johns.
Oh, definitely. There is a very robust defense for keeping the apostolic roots intact.
What's their argument?
Many scholars point out that the theological DNA across all these texts is undeniably unified.
Okay, like the themes.
Exactly. The concepts of light versus dark, the conquering lamb, the eternal word, they all share the exact same heartbeat. So the argument is that even if a scribe or an editorial circle finalized the grammar, smoothed it out, the authority and the theological vision trace directly back to John the Apostle.
Okay, let's ground this in time and space, because timing changes how you read literally everything.
It really does.
Jesus' ministry ends around 30 to 33 CE. The early church starts spreading. Decades pass. Then, in 70 CE, the Roman Empire comes in and completely destroys Jerusalem and the temple.
A massive historical rupture.
Huge. But these texts we're talking about, they don't show up until much later, right?
Really?
You're talking 80 to 100 CE.
Yes. Revelation is generally dated toward the very end of that window, around 95 CE, during the reign of Emperor Domitian. And look at where we are geographically, too.
Right, we aren't in Jerusalem anymore.
No, we are completely out of the rural agricultural world of Galilee. The primary setting for this community is Asia Minor, specifically the massive city of Ephesus.
Okay, put us on the ground there. What does it actually look and feel like to walk down the streets of first century Ephesus?
It is overwhelming. Ephesus was a cosmopolitan juggernaut.
Like a New York or a London?
Very much so. It was a major center of Roman commerce, banking, and politics, but it was also the absolute epicenter of the cult of Artemis.
Artemis, the Greek goddess.
Yes. The Temple of Artemis was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It completely dominated the skyline, and more importantly, it dominated the local economy.
Wow.
Thousands of priests, artisans, and silversmiths relied entirely on that pagan temple complex for their livelihood.
So if the earlier Gospels, like Mark and Luke, if they feel like localized documentaries of a grassroots movement out in the countryside, this setting feels entirely different.
It's completely different.
This isn't just a quiet religion anymore. This is a high-stakes, globalized, urban center. It's like trying to survive a hostile takeover in a corporate headquarters.
That's a great analogy. It was an environment of intense, constant pressure, and that pressure came from 2 very distinct directions.
Okay, what's the first one?
First, you have the lingering trauma of the temple's destruction in 70 CE. You have to understand, for the Jewish people, the temple wasn't just a big, important building.
Right, it was everything.
It was the cosmic center of the world. It was literally the place where heaven and earth met. So when Rome burned it to the ground, Judaism had to radically restructure itself just to survive.
They had to figure out how to maintain their entire identity without their central institution.
Exactly. Which inevitably leads to drawing very, very strict boundary lines.
Makes sense.
Before 70 CE, The followers of Jesus were largely viewed as just another sect within Judaism. They went to the synagogue, they observed the customs. But after the catastrophe of 70 CE, the surviving Jewish authorities needed absolute unity.
No room for fringe groups anymore.
None. And the Johannine texts reflect the agonizing reality of what scholars call the synagogue rupture. Believers in Jesus were being formally expelled from their local Jewish communities.
And that actually brings up a massive interpretive issue that I really want to lean into here, because if you read the Gospel of John, you constantly trip over this one specific phrase.
I know exactly the one you mean.
Yeah, over and over, the text refers to the antagonist simply as the Jews. The Jews did this, or the Jews demanded that. And to a modern ear, especially, after the horrors of the 20th century, that sounds incredibly anti-Semitic.
It does, and it is a profound tragedy that later generations weaponize that exact phrase to justify horrific atrocities.
Right.
But reading it as a blanket ethnic condemnation is a complete historical distortion. We have to remember the author is Jewish, Jesus is Jewish, all of his original disciples are Jewish.
So why use that specific term if they're all Jewish? It seems counterintuitive.
Because in the original first century context, it is an intra-family dispute. It's highly sectarian language.
Like a civil war.
Yes.
Yeah.
When the text says the Jews, it is primarily referring to the specific local religious authorities and the synagogue leaders in that post-70 CE environment who are actively enforcing the expulsions.
Okay.
It's a localized political term for the religious establishment. It is not a racial or ethnic category.
It's basically a turf war over who truly inherits the legacy of Moses.
Precisely. It's a debate over who is faithful to God's covenant. And that's just the pressure from the inside, from their own cultural heritage.
Right, because there's also the Romans.
At the exact same time, you have the crushing weight of the Roman Empire from the outside. Because in cities like Ephesus, worshiping the Roman emperor was not a private religious preference.
It was the law.
It was a civic duty. It was literally how you proved your loyalty to the state.
So if you refuse to burn incense to Caesar, you aren't just seen as a religious heretic, you are a political traitor. You're an enemy of the state.
Exactly. You are squeezed from both sides. You have lost the social safety net of your ancestral synagogue, and the dominant political superpower views you as a subversive threat.
Wow. Okay, so if these texts are so dangerous, if possessing them could literally get you expelled from your community or executed by the government, how do they even survive? We're talking about a fragile underground community. They obviously didn't have printing presses.
No, they didn't. And this is where the physical archaeology of the texts tells just an incredible story.
I love the archaeology part.
It's fascinating. When we dig in the dry sands of Egypt, we find physical fragments that prove how incredibly fast and how carefully this community copied these documents.
Tell me about the papyri, because I've heard there are specific fragments that really changed how historians view the whole timeline.
Yeah, the most famous one is known as P52.
P52.
It's housed in Manchester today, and it's tiny. It's basically a credit card-sized scrap of papyrus from the early 2nd century.
Wait, early 2nd century? That's just a few decades after the original was supposedly written.
Right, and it contains lines from John chapter 18, which is the trial of Jesus before Pilate.
Just on this little scrap.
Yeah. And then you have P66, which is a near-complete papyrus manuscript from the late 2nd or early 3rd century. And what these fragments do is act as historical anchors.
How so?
Well, when scholars analyze the Greek on a 2nd century scrap like P52, and then they compare it to the massive complete Bibles from the 4th century like Codex Sinaiticus, the text matches remarkably well.
So it wasn't playing a centuries-long game of telephone where the story got wildly exaggerated and changed over time.
No, it wasn't. The physical evidence proves an incredibly rapid transmission and a very high degree of textual stability.
That's amazing.
But there's another fascinating detail about these physical artifacts that we have to mention.
What's that?
They aren't scrolls.
Really?
The early Christian movement almost exclusively adopted the Codex.
A codex being a book with bound pages that you turn, rather than a continuous roll of parchment.
Yes.
Why is that such a big deal, though? It just sounds like a format choice.
Because the mechanics of how you read dictate how you use the text. Think about it. If you want to find a specific quote in the middle of the book of Isaiah on a traditional scroll, you have to unroll like 30 feet of fragile parchment.
That sounds exhausting.
It requires 2 hands, a really large table, and a lot of time to find what you're looking for.
But with a codex, you can literally just flip straight to page 45.
Exactly. It allows for rapid cross-referencing. It's also highly portable. You can hide a codex under your cloak if the authorities raid your
Oh,
house.
wow.
It essentially democratized the text, making it highly functional for a network of underground house churches.
That brings up a great question about the people who were actually hiding those books. What did the daily social mechanics of this network look like? Because you mentioned house churches. They obviously aren't meeting in massive public cathedrals.
No, not at all. In the Greco-Roman world, the public square was entirely dominated by honor and shame and by complex systems of patronage.
Patronage, like rich people funding things.
Yeah, and providing social protection, your social standing, your business guild, your family inheritance. Everything was tied up in public pagan rituals.
Right.
So to confess Christ was to voluntarily embrace social shame. You were actively cutting yourself off from the economic lifeblood of the city.
So if you're a traveling teacher, right, moving from city to city with these little codexes hidden in your bag, where do you sleep? How do you even eat if you've been essentially excommunicated from the local economy?
You relied entirely, 100%, on the hospitality of the local believers. And hospitality in the ancient world wasn't about, having friends over for a nice charcuterie board.
Right. It's not a dinner party.
No, it was life or death infrastructure. It was the only logistics network this early movement actually had.
I read that the third letter of John 3 John is essentially a case study in how this network operated, or, well, how it failed to operate.
It is a brilliant window into the tension of that time. It's a very short letter where the author basically praises a man named Gaius and severely condemns a man named Diotrephes.
Okay, what did Gaius do?
Gaius is praised because he opened his home. He funded the traveling teachers, he gave them a safe house, he provided provisions for their journey. He basically acted as a righteous patron.
But Diotrephes does the opposite.
Diotrephes is described as someone who loves to be first. He refuses to welcome the traveling teachers, and worse, if anyone in his local house church tries to show hospitality, Diotrephes excommunicates them.
Wow.
He literally kicks them out of the church.
He's acting like a mob boss, monopolizing control over his turf.
He really is. And what we need to notice here is that the author doesn't treat this as just a mere personality clash.
It's not just office politics.
No. How you use your social capital, your home, your dinner table, that is treated as a profound theological issue. Refusing hospitality is framed as a betrayal of the truth itself.
Because if the network collapses, the message dies.
Exactly.
So you have this urban, sophisticated community. They are facing social ostracization from the synagogue. They've got deadly political pressure from Rome, and they're dealing with internal power struggles in their house churches.
Yeah.
It makes total sense why they needed a gospel that did more than just recount historical facts.
They needed a theological anchor. They needed to know the cosmic identity of who they were actually suffering for.
Which brings us to the Gospel of John itself. And the way this book opens is just staggering.
The prologue.
Yes, John 1.1 through 18. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The terminology here is doing incredibly heavy lifting. What is actually happening with the Greek word logos?
It's brilliant, honestly. Logos is usually translated as word in English, but it is a massive conceptual bridge.
How so?
Well, in Greek philosophy, the logos was the rational principle that governed the entire cosmos. It was the logic that kept the stars in their courses and prevented the universe from just dissolving into pure chaos.
So for a Greek reader sitting in Ephesus, they hear the word logos, and they immediately think of the fundamental mathematical and philosophical fabric of reality.
Exactly. But for a Jewish reader, the Word of God is the active, dynamic power of Genesis.
Oh, right. God speaks, and it happens.
Yes. It is the voice that says, "Let there be light." And reality literally bends to obey. So John takes this massive abstract concept that bridges both cultures, and he drops an absolute bomb. The logos isn't an abstract principle. The logos is a person.
Wow.
And that person pitched his tent among us in actual human flesh.
He introduces this cosmic dualism right away, too. The light, the fog shining in the darkness, and the darkness cannot overcome it.
Yes.
It sets the stage for a very purposeful narrative structure, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because the gospel doesn't just wander aimlessly through Jesus' life like a travelogue.
No, it is highly, highly choreographed. The first half of the book, up to chapter 12, is often called the Book of Signs.
The Book of Signs. Okay.
It focuses on 7 public miracles that serve as very specific signposts pointing to Jesus' identity. Then the narrative pivots sharply. The public ministry ends, and chapters 13 through 21, which is often called the Book of Glory, focus intimately on the passion, the cross, and the resurrection.
And peppered throughout that first half are these highly detailed encounters with specific individuals. And it seems like John uses them to show how different types of people react when they literally collide with the logos.
Exactly.
Let's look at Nicodemus in chapter 3.
Oh, Nicodemus is the ultimate insider. He
Mhm.
is a Pharisee, he's a recognized member of the Jewish ruling council, a highly respected theologian, and he comes to Jesus at night.
Why at night? Is he just trying to avoid the paparazzi or what?
Well, John rarely uses physical details just for atmospheric effect. Night is a theological marker here.
Wow. Okay.
Nicodemus is conceptually in the dark. He recognizes Jesus has some sort of power. He calls him a teacher come from God, but he still views him entirely within his existing framework. He wants a dialogue. He wants a moral upgrade.
But Jesus won't play along with that. He completely derails the conversation.
He does. Jesus tells him, point blank, unless a person is born anuthen, which is a Greek word meaning either again or from above, they cannot even see the kingdom of God.
So Nicodemus is looking for new information, and Jesus basically says, no, you need a entirely new operating system.
That's exactly it. It's a total repudiation of moral self-repair. Nicodemus has reached the absolute pinnacle of religious rule-keeping, and Jesus says it's just not enough. Salvation isn't about trying harder. It requires a regenerating grace by the Spirit.
What's really brilliant is how the very next chapter juxtaposes this. Because in chapter 4, we meet the Samaritan woman at the well.
It is the perfect foil.
Yeah.
Think about it. Nicodemus is a Jewish male named religious insider who comes in the dark and leaves completely confused. The woman at the well is a Samaritan, female, unnamed social outcast who meets Jesus in the blazing light of noon.
She is as far outside the religious establishment as you can possibly get. I mean, Samaritans and Jews absolutely despised each other.
Yet she ends up having one of the longest and deepest theological conversations recorded anywhere in the Gospels. Jesus talks to her about living water and the true nature of worship.
And unlike the theology professor in chapter 3, she actually grasps it.
She gets it. She embodies the radical inclusivity of the Logos. She immediately leaves her water jar, runs back to the village that likely ostracized her in the first place, and she becomes the first evangelist.
Wow.
The contrast proves that access to the truth has absolutely nothing to do with religious pedigree.
We really can't talk about the Gospel of John without addressing the I am statements, the ego eimi declarations.
Essential.
Because Jesus keeps saying things like, I am the bread of life, I am the good shepherd, I am the true vine. Now, if I tell someone I am the bread of life, they probably just think I was speaking in weird poetic metaphors. Is that all this is?
No, not at all. It is a staggering, highly dangerous theological claim.
Dangerous.
Yes. To a Jewish audience, the phrase ego eimi is not a metaphor. It is a direct, unmistakable echo of the burning bush in Exodus, where God reveals his unpronounceable divine name to Moses. I am WHO, I am.
Oh, wow.
Every single time Jesus uses this construction, he is actively assuming the divine identity.
Wait, but if he is walking around first century Judea, openly claiming to be the voice from the burning bush, wouldn't that immediately get him arrested for blasphemy?
It absolutely does. It is the exact charge that eventually leads to his crucifixion.
Yeah.
But John is showing that Jesus isn't just claiming the title. He's claiming to be the actual fulfillment of all the ancient symbols.
Like what?
Well, the manna that fell from the sky in the wilderness. He is the true bread, the temple system of sacrifice. He is the lamb. It creates a theological framework that scholars call realized eschatology.
Realized eschatology. Break that down for me. Because eschatology is the study of the end times, right?
Mhm.
Like the final judgment, heaven, hell. How can that be realized in the present moment?
Right. Normally, people view eschatology as a distant future event. Sometime way at the end of history, God will judge the world and grant eternal life.
Right.
But John argues that because Jesus is the pre-existent creator actively walking among us, the end of history has basically collided with the present.
That's true.
It is. When you encounter Jesus, you are standing before the final judgment right now. Your reaction to him is your judgment. Eternal life doesn't start after you die. It starts the exact moment you believe.
That drastically changes how you read the Passion narrative then.
Yeah.
When we get to chapters 18 and 19, Jesus is arrested and brought before Pontius Pilate. On the surface, it just looks like a tragic miscarriage of justice. A helpless victim getting crushed by the power of the state.
But John saturates the entire trial sequence with intense irony. Pilate thinks he is interrogating a peasant. He thinks he holds the power of life and death. He acts like the judge.
But because of realized eschatology,
Yeah.
Jesus is actually the one on the bench.
Yes. Jesus isn't on trial. The political authority of Rome is on trial, and it is failing miserably. Jesus is shown to be in complete control of the timeline. Even the crucifixion itself is portrayed differently in John than in the other Gospels.
How so?
In the other Gospels, you hear the agony, my God, why have you forsaken me?" But in John, Jesus' final words are a definitive declaration of victory. It is finished.
It's like a completion of a task.
Exactly. The cross is portrayed not as a defeat, but bizarrely, as a royal enthronement. He is lifted up in glory at the precise moment of his death.
Which leads right to the climax of the gospel in chapter 20, with a character we all culturally know as Doubting Thomas.
Ah, Thomas.
Thomas is the guy who says, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and actually put my finger where the nails were, I will not believe."
Thomas really represents the skeptical reader. He wants empirical, physical proof.
But when the resurrected Jesus actually appears and invites Thomas to physically touch the wounds, Thomas skips right past the physical evidence.
Doesn't even touch it.
He just makes the highest, most explicit Christological claim in the entire book. He looks at Jesus and says, "My Lord and my God."
He fully connects the man standing in front of him with the wounds to the eternal logos from chapter 1. It's a massive realization.
And that confession is basically the launch pad for the gospel's explicit purpose statement, which comes immediately after that, right?
Yeah. Yes. John 20.31 says, "These are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." The entire complex literary architecture we've been talking about was engineered for one single purpose: to bring the reader to the exact same realization that Thomas had.
Okay, so the gospel establishes this towering, unshakable theology. Jesus is the divine I am. But human nature essentially guarantees that a community holding on to this theology is eventually going to fracture over how to interpret it.
It always happens.
And that brings us to the letters, 1, 2, and 3 John. If the gospel is the majestic revelation, what are the letters doing?
The letters are the gritty, on-the-ground pastoral protection of that revelation. They use the exact same vocabulary, light, dark, truth, love, abide, but they deploy it in a much more compressed, urgent register to manage a severe crisis.
What was the crisis? What was tearing the community apart?
False teachers had emerged from within their own ranks. In 1 John, the author actually labels them antichrists.
Hold on. Because when most people hear the word Antichrist, they picture a singular apocalyptic dictator from a Hollywood movie. You know, a guy with glowing red eyes taking over the UN. But you're saying it's plural here.
Yes, antichrists, plural, and it simply means against Christ. In this specific historical context, it refers to actual former members of the community who had left and were spreading a toxic theology.
What were they teaching?
They were heavily influenced by early philosophical movements, things we call proto-Gnosticism or Docetism, that basically viewed the physical material world as inherently corrupt and evil.
So matter is bad, spirit is good.
Exactly. Only the pure, unseen spiritual realm was good.
But wait, if the physical body is inherently evil, they can't possibly accept the prologue of John's gospel. They can't accept that the eternal logos became actual, sweating, bleeding human flesh.
You hit the nail on the head. They couldn't accept it. So they argued that Jesus only seemed to have a physical body.
Like a hologram.
Yeah, like an illusion. They believed the divine spirit temporarily possessed a human shell, but didn't actually suffer on the cross.
But if you remove the physical reality of the incarnation, you basically gut the entire religion.
You lose everything. I mean, if the incarnation isn't physical, then the suffering wasn't real. If the suffering wasn't real, there is no actual atonement for sin.
Right.
And if God doesn't redeem the physical body, then the material world, our actual daily lives, how we treat each other physically, just doesn't matter.
Wow.
That's exactly why 1 John urgently commands the community to test the spirits. You cannot just blindly accept every spiritual, feeling, or eloquent teacher that comes along. You have to measure them against the historical, physical reality of Jesus.
This creates a really fascinating tension when it comes to the concept of love, though. Well, the letters of John are famous for talking about love. 1 John tells us that God is love, using the Greek word agape, and that perfect love drives out fear. It's incredibly beautiful and comforting. But then you flip over to the second letter, 2 John, and the elder commands the church not to show hospitality to these false teachers.
Right.
He literally says, do not even welcome them into your house.
It creates a massive cognitive dissonance for modern readers, doesn't it?
It really does. How do you reconcile God as love with shut the door in their face? Our modern definition of love is highly tolerant, It usually just means affirming someone no matter what they believe or do.
And that is exactly where the ancient worldview clashes completely with ours.
Yeah.
To the Johannine community, love is not permissive tolerance. It is not just a warm, sentimental feeling. Love is fundamentally tied to covenant fidelity.
Meaning what exactly?
Meaning truth and love are inextricably bound together. They are two sides of the same coin.
So they aren't competing values. They are the same thing.
Exactly. If the entire survival of the community depends on the truth of the incarnate Son, then allowing someone into your home to systematically dismantle that truth is the most unloving thing you could possibly do.
Because it hurts everyone else.
Yes. Providing funding, giving a platform, and offering a safe house to a false teacher means you are actively participating in the spiritual destruction of your friends. True agape protects the flock. Hospitality must have boundaries when the very core of the gospel is at risk.
It's a fierce, protective love, not a soft love. And this ties into another major theme in the letters, the concept of abiding.
Yes, the Greek term is menu. It means to remain, to stay, to make your permanent home in something.
The letters seem obsessed with assurance. People are clearly terrified that they might be on the outside, that they might be deceived. But faith here isn't described as a one-time event, is it? It's not just walking down an aisle, praying a prayer, and then forgetting about it.
Not at all. Faith is a lifelong perseverance. See, the false teachers claim they had a secret, elevated spiritual knowledge that meant they didn't have to worry about physical sin anymore. They had transcended it.
Right.
John responds by saying, "You only know you're in the light if you actually abide in the light." Assurance isn't based on some past emotional experience. It is based on your present reality.
Like your daily actions.
Exactly. Are you currently confessing your sins? Are you relying on Christ as your advocate? Are you actively loving your brothers and sisters in tangible ways? If so, you are abiding.
Now, before we move on from the letters, there is a weird piece of historical trivia regarding 1 John that we really need to touch on. It involves a passage known as the Comma Johanneum.
Ah, yes.
It's in 1 John chapter 5, verses 7 and 8.
This is a very famous case study in textual criticism.
Right, because if someone listening picks up an older translation of the Bible, like the King James Version, they will read a very explicit formula for the Trinity right there in the text. It says, "For there are three that bear record in heaven, the Father, the Word, and the Holy Ghost. And these three are one." But modern scholars looking at the ancient manuscripts flag this passage. Why?
Because when we actually look at the earliest and most reliable Greek manuscripts we have, those specific words simply aren't there.
They just aren't there at all.
No. The scholarly consensus is that this explicit phrasing was a much later Latin expansion.
But how does an expansion just slip into the text? Did some monk maliciously try to rewrite the Bible to prove his point?
No, usually it's completely innocent. Imagine a scribe in the Middle Ages is copying the text, and he writes a theological explanatory note in the margin of the page to help the reader.
Like a study note.
Exactly. Then, decades later, another scribe is copying that manuscript, sees the note in the margin, assumes it was accidentally left out of the main text by the previous guy, and copies it directly into the paragraph. Oh. So it just gets baked in over time.
Yes. But because of modern archaeology and the vast number of ancient manuscripts we now have, going all the way back to those papyri we talked about earlier, we can easily spot the later additions.
Okay, that makes sense.
And look, the theology of the Trinity is obviously present throughout John's writings implicitly, but historians and theologians agree that this specific verse shouldn't be used as a foundational proof text simply because it wasn't penned by the original author.
Good to know. So the letters handle the internal crisis, the false teachers, the splintering theology. But the community is still sitting right under the shadow of Rome. The external threat of the empire is growing. And to address a threat of that magnitude, you can't just write a pastoral letter.
No, you need something much louder.
You need a completely different literary genre. You need apocalyptic fire. Enter the Book of Revelation.
The genre shift is absolute whiplash. You go from the quiet, intimate pastoral tone of 1 John straight into celestial battles and cosmic horror. Let's set the stage on Patmos. The author, John, is exiled. He is a political prisoner of Rome. And he starts receiving these overwhelming, terrifying visions. It's highly structured, but visually, it's just chaotic.
It's a sensory overload.
You have cycles of seven seals being broken, 7 trumpets blowing, 7 bowls of wrath poured out. You have multi-headed beasts rising from the sea, a dragon sweeping stars from the sky, a prostitute riding a monster. What is a normal person supposed to do with this?
Well, the first rule of reading apocalyptic literature is to understand what it is not trying to do. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Revelation is not newspaper coding.
Meaning it's not a secret cipher meant to help us predict modern geopolitical events.
Right.
It's not about microchips or 21st century dictators in Europe.
Exactly. If it meant absolutely nothing to the first century Christians who were actually bleeding and suffering under Emperor Domitian, then it's not a valid interpretation.
That's a great rule of thumb.
Apocalyptic literature is highly symbolic theology. It's designed to strengthen faithful endurance in a time of intense crisis. It pulls back the curtain on invisible spiritual realities to show the true nature of the earthly political struggles they were facing.
Okay, let's look at how it does that.
Yeah.
The pivot point of the whole book is in chapters 4 and 5. John sees a door standing open in heaven, and he's pulled up into the throne room of God. Historians call the worship scenes in these chapters political theology.
Yes.
How is singing songs in heaven a political act on earth? I don't get that.
Because of the specific vocabulary being used, remember what we said about Ephesus. Every single year, citizens were required to participate in the imperial cult. They had to offer incense, bow down, and publicly declare that the emperor was worthy and that Caesar was Lord and Savior.
It was the ultimate loyalty oath to the state.
Exactly. So when John writes a vision where the early church and literally all of creation are declaring that God and the Lamb are the only ones who are worthy to receive glory and power.
It is a deeply subversive act of treason against Rome.
Absolutely. To say Jesus is Lord is inherently a political statement because it automatically implies Caesar is not.
Wow. So worship becomes the ultimate act of resistance. You are refusing to grant the state the ultimate allegiance that it demands.
Yes.
And the central image of who they are worshiping is completely mind-bending. In chapter 5, John is weeping because no one is worthy to open the scroll of history. Then an elder tells him to stop crying because the Lion of the tribe of Judah has conquered. Now, if you hear that, you are expecting a massive roaring predator to step out and just shred the Roman Empire to pieces.
That's what everyone expected.
But John turns around to look at the lion. And what does he actually see?
He sees a lamb. And not just a lamb, but a lamb that looks as though it has been slaughtered.
It's just jarring.
It really is. The Greek word is aronion, which actually means a little pet lamb. It is the ultimate paradox of power.
It completely upends everything we think about victory and strength.
It redefines the very nature of kingship. Think about it. The empire conquers by killing its enemies with overwhelming, brutal military violence. The lamb conquers by absorbing that violence and dying for his enemies. It is a slain yet victorious kingship.
And that paradox trickles down to how the believers are supposed to fight back, doesn't it? There's a Greek concept that runs all the way through Revelation.
Nikai. It means to overcome or to conquer. The believers are repeatedly commanded to conquer.
But how? Because they clearly don't take up swords. They don't form a militia to overthrow Rome.
No, they conquer by faithful endurance. They overcome the beast, as the text says, by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony. They win by refusing to compromise, even if it costs them their physical lives. They are literally following the exact pattern of the slaughtered lamb.
This imagery is so incredibly thick. The dragon represents the unseen satanic power pulling the strings. The beasts from the sea and the land represent the state power and the propaganda machinery that enforces the worship. And then you have Babylon, which serves as the archetype for any human empire built on anti-God power, economic exploitation, and violence. All of this tension is building toward a massive climax. How does the story actually end?
It culminates in a vision of consummated eschatology in Revelation chapters 21 and 22, and it is perhaps one of the most widely misunderstood concepts in popular religion today.
Really? Because a lot of people think the end of the story is just that the earth burns up and all the good people float away on clouds to live as disembodied spirits playing harps forever.
I know, but that is actually closer to the Greek philosophy we talked about earlier, the idea of escaping the evil physical body, than it is to the biblical text.
Oh, interesting.
Revelation ends with the exact opposite trajectory. John doesn't see people going up to heaven. He sees the holy city, the New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven to earth.
Because God is moving his headquarters here.
Exactly. It is the absolute physical renewal of creation. The material world isn't scrapped. It is redeemed, it's purged of evil, and it's restored.
Like Genesis all over again.
Yes, it is a return to the Edenic life of Genesis, but elevated to a glorified city. God makes his permanent dwelling place with humanity on a renewed physical earth.
Now, when we talk about how we actually get to that end point, there is a famously debated chapter right before the end, Revelation 20, that mentions a millennium, a 1,000-year reign. This has caused massive theological arguments for centuries.
Oh, it is highly contested. There are three main historical positions on
Okay,
this.
let's go through them impartially.
Sure. First, you have premillennialism, which argues that Christ will return physically to Earth before establishing a literal thousand-year political reign.
Okay.
Then you have amillennialism, which views the 1,000 years symbolically, arguing it represents the current, ongoing church age where Christ reigns spiritually from heaven right now.
Got it.
And finally, postmillennialism, which believes that the preaching of the gospel will gradually Christianize and transform the world, bringing about a golden age of peace before Christ returns.
People build entire denominations around those differences. But taking a step back, looking at the Johannine literature as a whole, what is the actual priority of the text? Does it care about the specific timeline?
The source makes it clear that the sequencing of the timeline is secondary. The overarching absolute certainty of revelation is not providing a detailed calendar. It is the final victory of the Lamb.
Right.
The point of the book is to look a suffering, terrified first-century Christian in the eye and assure them that evil has an expiration date. Death is thrown into the lake of fire, the Lamb wins, and creation is made new.
We have covered a staggering amount of ground today. I mean, we've traveled from the cosmopolitan streets and pagan temples of first-century Ephesus to the cosmic, thunderous throne room of Revelation.
It's a journey.
We've explored the philosophical weight of the eternal word, the protective pastoral boundaries of truth in the letters, and the subversive political resistance of apocalyptic worship.
It is a sweeping, beautifully cohesive theological vision.
It really is.
Yeah.
But the question always remains, how does this ancient, dense, highly symbolic theology land in the lap of someone listening right now? So what does this all mean for you today?
The contemporary applications are remarkably sharp, actually. First, think about the cultural moment we are in right now. We live in an age of profound ideological confusion and doctrinal relativism. The idea of objective truth is heavily scrutinized. It's all about, my truth or your truth.
But John insists that truth isn't just a flexible concept or personal preference.
No, he insists truth is a person. It is objective, and it is anchored in the historical reality of the incarnate Son.
Right.
If truth is tied to the physical reality of the Logos, it provides a concrete foundation to stand on when the culture around you feels entirely fluid and untethered.
That plays directly into the second major application, which is identity.
Yep.
We live in a culture of deeply fragmented identity. We constantly define ourselves by our careers, our curated social media profiles, our political tribes, or just our outward appearance.
Which is incredibly fragile.
So fragile.
If your identity is your career, what happens to your sense of self when the economy shifts and you get laid off? If it's your appearance, what happens when you age? John offers an entirely different anchor.
What's that?
He roots human personhood deeply in the concept of sonship and the new birth we talked about with Nicodemus. You are a child of God not by your own moral performance or social climbing, but by regenerating grace.
That's a huge relief.
It creates a psychological resilience that the world simply cannot take away.
And third, maybe the most urgent application for our highly polarized public square. Revelation brilliantly exposes the idolatry of empire.
It is a masterclass in seeing behind the propaganda. Revelation trains the reader to recognize that human power structures, whether they are political parties, economic systems, or nationalistic movements, they always have a sinister tendency to demand ultimate allegiance.
They want you to define your ultimate security by them.
Exactly.
It's a warning not to mistake modern-day Babylon for the New Jerusalem. We are constantly tempted to intertwine our religious devotion with our political loyalties.
And Revelation reminds us forcefully that the state is not our savior. True power looks like the servant leadership of the slaughtered lamb, not the coercive force of the beast.
Which leads right into a direct warning for modern leadership, drawing on the letter of 3 John.
The warning of Diotrephes.
Right. The guy who loved to be first and controlled, who got access to the church.
Diotrephes is a 2,000-year-old archetype of toxic leadership. Domineering control, the abuse of spiritual authority, the lack of basic hospitality. These are constant temptations in any organization, even today.
Sadly, yes.
John champions a model of leadership built on servant-shaped, hospitable credibility instead. It reflects the Christ of John 13, who gets down and washes his disciples' feet, utterly rejecting the power-hungry mechanics of the empire.
Looking at the entire Johannine corpus, it's just a breathtaking redemptive arc. You start with the explosive revelation of the gospel, the Logos pitching his tent in the dirt of human history. You move into the letters, which demand that orthodoxy believing the right things, and orthopraxy, living with holy, protective love, can never be separated. You have to believe the truth, and you have to fiercely love your community.
They go hand in hand.
And it all climaxes with the cosmic consummation and revelation, a totally renewed Earth where heaven finally dwells with humanity.
It demands a total response. You really cannot read these texts and remain a neutral observer.
Which is why we want to leave you with one final, lingering thought to mull over today. A question built directly on the tension between the Lamb and the Empire.
Revelation forces us to examine our own lives and ask a very uncomfortable question. Who or what is genuinely receiving our worship?
Because worship is allegiance.
Exactly. Look at the modern empires in your own life. Is it the relentless pursuit of career advancement? Is it an intense tribal political affiliation? Is it the desperate drive for wealth or social status?
All of those demand so much of us.
They do. So ask yourself, which of those empires are subtly demanding the ultimate allegiance and security that John argues belongs absolutely and only to the Lamb?
It brings us right back to the beginning. If the historical figure you're reading about is actually the cosmic creator of the universe, it requires a complete recalibration of your entire reality. The Logos changes everything.
It truly does.
Thank you for joining us on this massive deep dive into the Johannine writings. We highly encourage you to open up these texts, read them for yourself, and see what you find. Keep digging and keep diving deep.